I'm Scott Al Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. I get a lot of comments from people on a regular basis, but it does seem to be copied and pasted, so I wonder how many of them are real. Noticing that we have fences and walls and things on top of the walls to discourage people and animals from hopping over those walls and jumping into our yards, making it seem like they think that means that where we live is unsafe, which is pretty weird that they would use ways of building walls as a way to indicate safety versus violence statistics or overall behavior or actual break-ins or something of the sort. People have a weird panic response when it comes to the safety of other places I've found. So I want to talk a little bit about how we see safety around the world and why this is a really weird reaction to have when looking at a new place. We're going to get to that right after the bump. Here in Nicaragua, as in all of Latin America, it is culturally standard to have walls. When you have a large estate, you have a lot of space. Now, if you're living in a city or whatever, it's quite a bit different. Different places do different things based on the obvious nature of the physical building that you're in. But if you're in anywhere in Nicaragua, it is really common to have fences around where you live. I'm going to turn the camera to, well, yeah, you can see it. Right up here, we have just a fence, and it's spiky on top. Now, of course, you're going to find spiky fences in beautiful parts of England. You're going to find big fences in the U.S. Now, the U.S. has a tendency to use blind fences that don't have spiky things on top, and here in Nicaragua, we tend to use very open fences that you can see through with spiky things on top. Very different behaviors. In much of the United States, people value a degree of privacy that here in Latin America, we don't think really much of. We have no reason for people not to look at us in our yards mostly, but a lot of Americans, especially in the South, I live a bit of time in Texas, people would be rather appalled if their neighbors could see them, I don't know, having a picnic or whatever. Like, it's just people like to be private in their yards. That's fine. No reason not to do that. But we don't generally react and think that those places are scary just because they can't let someone see in. That would be a bit of a strange reaction because there's really obvious reasons why a Texan may want a wall like that. You don't want your neighbors looking at everything you do. People do live pretty close to each other, although probably not as close as a lot of Nicaraguans. But having grown up in rural New York, we didn't worry about those things because my neighbor would have to get out a telescope to see what we were doing in our yard. Whereas in Texas, people could just peer over the wall, walk up and talk to you. Your voices would actually interact with each other, and Americans tend to find that really annoying. If you're having a picnic with your family, the neighbors are having a picnic with their family, you're playing some rap music, they're playing some heavy metal. It's just, you don't mind what they're doing, they don't mind what you're doing, but you don't want to listen to and talk over each other, and that would often happen. So we value a certain amount of privacy, which could just be a little bit of quiet. It could mean a lot of different things. So we don't think of that as really a big deal. It totally makes sense. Now, of course, there are reasons you would have a blind wall, a totally non-visible wall for security reasons, and one of those reasons is that you're afraid that your neighbors are going to watch you and report on everything you do. You may say something and you're afraid it's going to be reported to the government or whatever. And when you live in the United States, a lot of people, right or wrong, are terrified of being ratted out by their neighbors. And literally, when I'm in the United States, people are constantly like, you can't talk about that here. No, you can't say that in public. It's not safe. And people do often have a fear of their direct neighbors, both finding out what they do, but also that their neighbors could be dangerous. We often don't know our neighbors. So the United States has a very different relationship with the people around them. And as a general thing that causes this, and people don't often think about this, most Americans are going to live, especially as adults, in places where they didn't grow up as children. You may be nearby, right? Maybe you were born in Houston, Texas, and now you live in Kingswood, right? But by the time you move 1 or 2 towns away in such a big populated area, you're actually living around complete strangers. There may be people that you know not far away. Within 10 minutes drive, you may have lots of friends that you've known for a long time. That's fine. But the direct neighbors all around your house, they don't know you, they don't know your parents, they don't know your cousins, and their cousins don't know your cousins, and so forth. You're around strangers. You are, except for having some shared experiences with the grocery store and maybe the same type of high school and knowing some of the same songs and speaking the same language, and not even that in many cases, you are basically living around foreigners for all intents and purposes. So having some shielding from them because you really don't want to be looking at each other because they're just random strangers, makes sense. We also tend to move in and out a lot. So the next door neighbor that you might get along with today and not mind sharing a backyard with, maybe a completely different person every 6 months, every 6 years, whatever. And that is a risk, and that's rolling the dice on what they're going to be like. So Americans have a tendency, for really good reasons in most cases, except for the one, to want to have blind backyards. Nicaraguans have some very different factors. One is that it's really warm here nearly all the time. There's very few times of year or day or anything where we would like to promote the idea of blocking wind movement. So we're going to prioritize that over a lot of things. They also don't tend to be very private, and wherever you live tends to be around people you grew up with. There's always going to be an exception, but by and large, people live near family and near where they grew up. So there's a good chance that your next door neighbors that you may be looking through your fence at you already know who you are. And in general, people don't have this everyone's out to get each other kind of vibe. There's still a certain amount of I don't want my neighbors listening in on me. That does exist, but it's far less. And the idea that you could be so quiet and not be interacting with the noise from the neighbors is just a pipe dream. Things are so loud that even if you did put up privacy walls like you have in Texas, it wouldn't stop the noise. That's not necessarily the best answer, but it's reality. So why bother spending all that money? Just enjoy the fact that you can be, sorry, my dogs are crazy and just ran under my feet. Enjoy the fact that you get fresh air and so forth. They're now on the camera. I am not touching the camera, nor is the wind. That is the dogs. But now let's talk about some other security concerns. So the same things carry over in different parts of the world for similar, sometimes, and completely different reasons in others. If you go to a lot of Europe, which by most accounts is the safest or nearly the safest place on Earth, especially the majority of Europe, right? There's pockets that are not true, but most of Europe is extremely safe, at least when we're talking about violent crime. There are pickpocketing and such quite a bit more than we're used to in North America. But if you're going to Europe, even places like Germany, but definitely places like Spain or France or Italy, Greece, places that we generally think of as being very pleasant, very safe, and so forth, they do things like bring down metal barriers on the outside of their windows at night, or if they're going to be away. This is an extreme amount of security that in the United States we would never consider doing. But they never put up fences around their yards. I say never, of course, there's an exception, but generally they're not building these walled patio or walled garden areas, literally walled gardens, as opposed to the phrase. They're just securing their houses, but in many cases they have old stone houses. So if you want to break into a Greek house on Crete, for example, I used to live on the outskirts of Rethymno in Prines. If you wanted to break into my place, you would have need a bulldozer. You weren't coming in with a hammer. You weren't coming in with a sledgehammer. You weren't coming in with any normal device. We had bars on the windows. We had heavy-duty metal windows, like really strong, and we had big, powerful doors. The walls were this thick of stone, and over the windows, big metal barriers would come down. A sledgehammer would really struggle to go through. It would damage it. It would make it a real problem. It would break the glass, but it would not get into the house. So the amount of security that we had was extreme because the house was a big brick of rock, a big solid rock. It wasn't a brick of rock. It didn't have bricks. It had rocks. And all the neighbors were built that way. Breaking into one of those houses, unthinkable. I mean, if you really needed to, if you had an army behind you, you'd get in, but no casual person is going to get in. And anyone who tried to get in, of course, would make lots of noise and take a lot of time. So if the place is abandoned, you got lots of time for the neighbors to figure out something's going on. And if it's not abandoned, you got a lot of time for the people inside to call the police and the neighbors and everything else. We're probably already there because of the noise that's being made. So it's really unlikely someone's going to try to break into your house, and very unlikely that they're going to be successful at it. So that is the way that they live. But does that happen because it's so unsafe and there's so many people trying to break into houses? Absolutely not. Partially it happens because it's a way of shielding sunlight and keeping the houses cool. By having metal barriers outside the glass, they keep the sunlight from ever entering the house. And so it's a very popular way to get a great degree of security, being able to be super confident in houses that sometimes they like to leave unattended for long periods of time, while also keeping them much cooler, something that's very important in the Mediterranean especially. But you will find these structures all throughout Europe, partially because they're quite affordable and available everywhere. It's just a thing you can do. So here in Nicaragua, we have similar factors, right? We have things that make us want to behave a certain way. Now, we often have houses that have strong walls. So like Europe, we tend to not have to worry about people just coming through the wall of our house. In the United States, houses are often made out of material where you might be able to just come through a wall. So that kind of helps some decisions to be made there as far as security goes. But here in Nicaragua, we tend to live outside pretty extensively and constantly are going in and out. Europe does a bit of this as well. So some of these things are shared. Here in Nicaragua, it is really common. It's always warm. We don't have the cold season like Europe does. Europe needs to close up their houses. The idea that you're going to completely close up, much like North America, exists. It would be unthinkable to have North America or European houses, in all but a few exceptions, not be able to completely close themselves up to keep themselves warm or to keep themselves cool, and in some cases to keep themselves secure. But we don't normally look at the concept of closing the house as a security mechanism. But to a Nicaraguan, it certainly looks that way, right? It seems like people are so fearful they have to shut up their houses. Here in Nicaragua, it is common, even in the middle of the city, for windows and doors to be wide open during the day. Here in Nicaragua, even in the barrios, it is common to keep houses completely open. Doors wide open, windows wide open, nothing to stop someone from coming in, at least during the day. Maybe while sleeping, that is going to change a little bit, and I'll explain how it is for us here. But it is a open place, and so that is something that if you're in much of Europe, and definitely in the United States, people would be appalled. When I stay in the United States, now this is an anecdote and an extreme example, but every time we pass by the front door, everyone locks it. They're super conscious about keeping the windows always closed, doors always closed. They never go to fresh air. Every door is closed. Every door is locked. Every door is armed all the time. Most of the space around the house and all the main ingress and egress is walled barriers, just like this, spikes on top of the wall, fence, but blind fence that you can't get to without already being on the property. Everything is blind that can be, so you can't see in. So this is way more extreme than what we have here. And if you go outside, even for just a minute to do something, someone will come right behind you, close the door, and lock it real quickly. So you have to ask someone to let you into the house. And there's no way to see who's outside because every window isn't just closed, but it is locked and there are shades down. So privacy, so you can't see in, even not from the yard, but from outside, like the sidewalk and such. So that's what I'm used to. Now, there's lots of places in the United States and a lot of people who don't do that, but there are plenty of people who do. And this is what I've been experiencing when in the United States for the last many years. Most of the people that I am around, this is how they secure their houses. So the level of fear and actively making just the normal life decisions as to how to keep the windows are things that come from a position of needing to have safety either from prying eyes or from entry or from potential of entry, right? So this is a really extreme feeling. When I go to the United States, I sense fear. True, palpable fear of someone entering the house, fear of someone looking into the house, like real fear. That is normal. I know lots of people like that, but anecdotally, the place where I stay, the family that I stay with, this is their response to the place that they live in. They are absolutely fearful of the place and the neighbors that they live in, and they're in one of the towns ranked safest in North America. It is an absolutely safe neighborhood, right, in a relatively safe state. So, and by relatively, I mean better than the U.S. average, and as a state, safer than Nicaragua's annual average, right? By small amounts, but safer, right? So this is a very safe place, because Nicaragua is very safe already as a starting point. Here, we take a different tact. Now, I'm on an estate, so people see this. So we have razor wire at the top of our walls. And as some of you know, we have actually had break-ins. Now, break-in is a very misleading term. We're in a very large wooded area, and we have had someone, maybe more than one person, we don't know, but we know one person managed to go over a wall somewhere far away, because we have a big space where it's completely blind, no one can see them, walked through the wooded area, and found some of our soap, and got away with it. That really sucks. The idea that someone got close enough to our house to get our soap is unfortunate, and it feels terrible, right? Someone stole our soap, but let's give it some perspective. They stole it from outside of our house. It was outside. Now, they did go over our wall to get to it. So this would be much like leaving soap out in your backyard, somewhere in Texas, for example, having a blind wall that people can't see in, and they hopped that wall, stole your soap, and ran away. Now, you would not be happy to find out that that happened. You'd be rather upset, not so much at the loss of the soap, but that someone was in your yard and willing to take things. You'd like to think that that space is completely your own, completely private, completely protected, and that you could go out there anytime and just not have to worry about anything. And it isn't necessarily. It's easy for someone to come over a wall. If you left soap out there, it's easy for someone to get. So Here we have razor wire now on top of the walls, or in some cases we have broken glass because it's cheap, but we don't like to do that for a couple of reasons. But the razor wire is incredibly cheap because that's just what people do in Latin America. So there's massive amounts of it at very low cost. So because of that, it is very easy. There's people to install it. They'll come out the same day. It's just a very effective means of just making it hard to steal your soap, right? And in doing this, we actually had someone come over the wall and tried to do it during the daytime. Our cleaner was out there, saw him, he ran for it because he was scared, and did so much damage to himself trying to get over the wall that they caught him when he went to the hospital. So while it didn't do anything to stop him coming in, because somehow it's still really easy to get in, it was enough that when he got caught, he ended up having to go to the hospital. And now he's going to jail because it turned out there were a lot of people looking for him for similar things, and they knew exactly who he was because some of us have video cameras and got him on camera. So they knew exactly what was going on, and they just had to track him down. And they found him at the hospital a few days later. So that worked out really well. But that is why you want to have razor wire, because it's so easy to come over the walls. And you say, but I don't really worry about that in most of the United States. Of course, some people are going to be like, I'm terrified of that. What do I do? Right? One of the things that's very different, and I think if anything could tell you which place actually has fear, and that's what we're talking about. People, when they say, oh, you have razor wire, ergo it's not safe. You're so scared and it makes it not safe. This is a chain of things. People think that by having razor wire that we're scared. But razor wire, one, we didn't put up. Now, we did add a few bits, but the razor wire is already here. We rented a place and there's razor wire because that's standard. Because it's standard, it's a cultural thing, right? You have to have it or no one's going to rent from you. It's just expected to be there. So it's there as part of the rental. We didn't put it up because we're scared. So that's the first leap, is assuming that we have to have the razor wire because we're afraid of something. Now, we do want to discourage people. We have dogs and we want to keep them safe in the yard, and we have children here. So we're going to go to whatever length is affordable to keep them safe, period. Here in Nicaragua, razor wire is not considered an eyesore. I realize that as an American, I don't like how it looks. However, having lived here for years, I don't notice it anymore. It's everywhere and you're just used to it. It's on top of everything, everywhere. Bars on windows, they're standard for reasons we're going to talk about. But so that razor wire is just there. So the first implication is people are, and honestly, when people are doing this, it feels to me that they're very desperate to try to find some way to make Nicaragua or Latin America seem more dangerous than it is, because there's some emotional thing that needs to be fulfilled. Either they're scared where they are and don't like that they can't justify why they're living in a scary place. They need other places to seem scary or whatever. I don't know. But it seems to be coming from a very odd place. But when you're looking here and say, okay, we've got some razor wire, but that comes with the place. And yep, we added some razor wire. Okay, we didn't like people stealing our soap, and honestly, it's a little bit disconcerting because they did come over our wall and we're close to our house, but they didn't get into our house, right? It's not like they broke into our house, right? There was no breaking and there was no entering. They entered the yard, so I don't know how you would qualify that, but they entered the open space outside the house, and that feels disconcerting. So we added a little bit of razor wire in the hopes of that discouraging people from coming in here. And so far, that seems to have worked. And it was very, very cheap. Now, the same thing in the United States. Would one be considered an eyesore and in many cases cause problems with your neighbors? So that would be a negative. That'd be a reason you wouldn't do it. It also is relatively expensive. You'd spend a lot of money having it purchased and put up. So both of those things make it to American viewers seem like, didn't you go through a lot of effort to secure your property? But to a Nicaraguan, you're like, that's just the minimum effort. Of course you did that. Even a Nicaraguan on a Nicaraguan budget would do that without thinking twice. It's just what you do because it's such a cheap and easy way to discourage things, and animals just walk right through it, so it doesn't cause any major problems. But big animals would be turned around by it, but little ones like cats and stuff, they just walk right through. They don't even notice that it's there. So that perspective is a big one, right? It doesn't imply a real fear to Nicaraguans. It's kind of like you have to put siding on your house. They think you just have to have razor wire or something at the top of your fences. And you'll notice that while we have razor wire on the top of the big brick walls, stone walls or whatever, we just have normal fencing here that has attractive tops, and that's plenty. You don't need to do anything special. We also have a little bit of plants for privacy, but mostly because they look nice, not because we actually need it. And sometimes it's like, well, maybe we should cut them down so we get more wind. But let's talk about the elephant in the room here. One of the biggest things that Americans have a tendency to do, and I think we can all admit that this is generally a fear reaction, there's exceptions, But for the vast majority of Americans, the reason that you have this particular item by the side of your bed is because you're afraid. It takes serious fear, actually, to make this decision because statistically doing so puts you at a lot of risk. So it represents a level of fear that means you're going past what is safe and practical and going into a panic fear response where you're putting yourself in danger in order to feel more in control. So this is not a practical measure, and that is having a gun in the house. Now, of course, in America, you're easily allowed to have a gun in the house, and here in Nicaragua, that would be very difficult to be allowed to do. So legalities do drive a lot of the factors here. Many Nicaraguans would likely have guns near their bed if they were allowed to in the same way as Americans. So we can't read into this too deeply. That would be misleading. It's important to maintain the complete context here, but it is very true that a great number of Americans keep guns in their houses, and just having one in your house, in a lockbox, in a cupboard, right, may just be a wise decision, but having one near your bed, easily accessible because you're afraid you're going to need to use it at night and you're going to react very quickly with a gun, has statistically shown that it is not something that makes you safer. You're more likely to get shot because you had a gun. You're more likely to shoot another member of your family because you have a gun. A member of your family is far more likely to, I believe this is true, double check me on this statistic, but you're more likely to have an accident at home than to protect yourself from an intruder, right? Like you become the risk rather than them becoming the risk. And then you also make them more likely to do something to you because you're protecting the house rather than just giving up. And not that you shouldn't stand your ground, right? That's not always the wrong thing to do, but it does carry risks. So statistically, putting a gun in your house is not a safety measure for you. It just puts you at risk. Whereas I don't know of any, low cost putting up some razor wire, which is a passive thing, which protects our house even when we're not here. We just don't want people getting into our house. But having a gun in the house puts you at additional risk and puts other people at additional risk and is very costly and carries a lot of liabilities. We don't have liability for the razor wire on top of the walls. It's installed by professionals. Everybody has it. If someone gets hurt on it, that's on them. They can't come after us and sue us because, but I was sneaking over the wall and I got hurt, right? This isn't the US. We don't have those kinds of things. But in the US, you use a gun and you can't prove that you needed to. There's a lot of cases, and this goes really extreme in both directions. In some states, you're going to be like, I just shot anybody and everybody, and a whole bunch of innocent people died, and it doesn't matter because I was the one standing my ground. And then in other states, you have a whole bunch of I was going to die, but I was able to protect myself, and you still go to jail because like it's extreme in both directions, right? There's a happy middle ground that's hard to find apparently, and people struggle with that. So it's not always the same thing, but there's risks in having a gun in your house, both legal and safety. And so that so many Americans, and this is seriously more Americans have guns than Nicaraguans have razor wire. I'm completely making that up, but I'm pretty confident in that statistic that, and I mean, in percentages of the population, clearly there are more American guns than there are Nicaraguans. That would be silly. But statistically, more Americans as a ratio of the population have guns in their homes, I believe, than Nicaraguans have razor wires. In reality, probably at most 50% of Nicaraguans have razor wire, and easily it's quite a bit less. You see it on more prominent houses because houses by roads that you tend to drive by are far more likely to have razor wire than people living out in the barrio somewhere who have less and are just not so much targets and have lots of close neighbors around all the time. It's these houses that are more remote where you end up with empty houses from time to time, especially because people have a tendency to own multiple houses here. And so there's a tendency to want to break into them because there's a good chance they're empty and it's not going to be a confrontation. You're just going to hop the wall and maybe make off with something, a TV, a chair, whatever you can get. So that reaction to Nicaraguans feels like North Americans are incredibly fearful. Their houses are locked up. They're not getting fresh air. They're not able to just come and go without opening and closing doors. They have weapons in their house to protect them. These things make America sound really, really scary to a Nicaraguan or Latin American ear, or when we're looking at what it's like there. And obviously, there is some danger in North America, but it is reasonable to say that North America is generally pretty safe, especially from home invasion. I've heard a lot of Canadians say that they're really scared of home invasion now, but at least talking about the United States, home invasion is pretty rare. Actually, more rare than it is here in Nicaragua. Here, Unarmed home invasion, where it is simply people trying to snatch something and go, is far more common than it is in the US, partially because of the gun thing. And so the guns are not 100% negative. And there is an argument to be made that we don't know how many crimes don't happen because of the potential of people having guns. And that is absolutely true. Maybe the US would be far more dangerous if there were not any guns. But that the supporting statistics for that are poor, but it is a real valid hypothesis to work with. So important to be aware of that, but we need to also keep it in perspective. So to Americans, having razor wire here feels like something that's a lot of effort, but isn't actually, and implies something that it doesn't. And to Nicaraguans, Americans having guns and closing up their houses, as an American, I can say 100% those things represent, in most situations, fear of real problems. Americans truly are afraid of home invasions. They truly are afraid of break-ins. And those are things that they put a lot, well, in one case, they really curtail their lives to make things more difficult for themselves to be able to protect against home invasions. And in the other, they put themselves at risk as a panic response or a heavily emotional response to those home invasions, where they're fearful to the point where they're not necessarily thinking clearly and losing money and safety in order to have, and this is a general problem that all humans have, the impression of control, where in reality you can't have that control. It's kind of like driving instead of flying. It doesn't take very much to research and know that flying in a commercial airplane is dramatically safer than any person can possibly drive, yet driving makes you feel like you're in control. So the average person will actually opt for the more dangerous thing when they have a panic response. Panic and emotional responses to safety are generally very dangerous. One of the best ways to keep yourself safe is to stick with logic and statistics. One of the best ways to harm yourself is to start to panic and get emotional about things that involve your safety. Now, if we were to apply all these same logics and arguments to people in Europe, and of course, Europe is a big place, and we're not talking about everywhere, but we were to look at least Mediterranean Europe, where I've lived, and they're bringing down metal barriers on the walls, all, on the windows and all these things. It feels like they must be even more scared of the world than North Americans or Nicaraguans. And none of this really adds up. Basically, what we're saying is the safer a place is statistically, the more people are worried about break-ins. Actually, that's a valid thing. The safer you are, the more you may be concerned about a minor thing. Whereas if you have more major crime and you're worried about being shot on the street or, arbitrary arrest or something, you're going to be less worried. So in the United States, we have so many things to be fearful of that home invasion just isn't at the top of our list. That's horrible to say, but it is absolutely true. Now, maybe it statistically is the thing we have to worry about, but the things that are in the news are not home invasions. That's not what people are sitting around worrying about under most conditions. But in Nicaragua, that is what people are afraid of, even though it's less likely statistically to happen, or at least violent crime is less likely statistically to happen. We assume home invasions are lumped in with that. Future Scott jumping in because I had to edit this over a couple of days. One of the points that it needs to be made here is quite often when we're talking about safety, I come from North America, I come from the United States. And when we're talking about safety, we are always meaning physical safety. We never mean something else. It could be physical violence, or maybe getting an arm broken, you're getting stabbed, you get cut, you get bruised, you get killed. Those are the things we talk about when we use the term safety. To go with what I was saying, that depending on what the safety is of the country that you're in, what they worry about changes. And here in Nicaragua, quite often people warn me about my safety and people get really scared. And I'll question, I say this a lot, right? I question, what are you afraid of? I've walked these streets, I've done these things, nothing bad has ever happened. What do you think is going to happen to me? Look how safe this is. Which of these people do you think is going to stab me or pull me into a doorway and beat me? And they're like, what? No, they could steal your camera. They might pick your pocket. They'll grab your phone when you're not looking. Nicaraguans define safety primarily, of course, violent crime is a safety issue. They understand that. But they also lump in things like having your phone grabbed off of a table by someone running by a restaurant, or someone's driving by on a motorcycle and snatching a camera out of your hand and taking off with it as safety. They consider those things safety issues. So when they say a neighborhood isn't safe, to Americans, we hear and repeat, oh, I was told this is an unsafe neighborhood. But when you question what someone actually means, under normal circumstances, what they mean is you could be robbed, pickpocketed, or such, which is bad, right? No question. And those things are generally less likely to happen in North America. We have a skew towards more aggressive crime and away from petty crime, mostly because the penalties are so much more severe. So if you're going to commit a crime, it's just worth go high or go home, right? Here in Nicaragua, crimes generally have a really heavy penalty, much more so than North America if they're violent, but much less so if they're petty. And a lot of that is because this is a very poor country. So little things like grabbing a phone off of a restaurant table could represent months of income for someone, for a family that could be fed because of that. But to a North American, grabbing a phone off of a table could mean someone, beats you, shoots you, or you just go to jail over something that is not very significant cost-wise. You're just not getting enough from it to take that risk. So here in Nicaragua, the risk is lower, the reward is enormous for something like that. And in like the US or Canada, the risk is huge. Someone could stand their ground based on you grabbing something from them and trying to get away. They risk the crowd taking them down. Like, violence could happen. Of course, that can happen here, but normally it's going to be if something really bad is happening, not someone snatching something. They might try to grab them, but they're not going to kill them over that, right? It's a completely different thing. Not that would normally happen in North America, but you understand the point. Once you're in a conflict with the police, things escalate and it can get very dangerous over very small infractions, or seemingly small infractions. So when Nicaraguans are repeating what they're afraid of, when Americans hear what they're afraid of, we get one impression, but there's a lot of protections here that go into avoiding what they see as security issues, which includes just stealing things, and not just stealing things that require breaking into your house. But for example, and I'm going to turn the camera here a little bit, I apologize, I have some furniture sitting out here. This is outside and completely not locked down. Anyone who comes over my wall can totally grab one of these, hop back over the wall and take off. Of course, stealing a chair is a really annoying thing to do, right? From a theft perspective, right? It's also annoying to me. I don't want to lose my chairs. But if one of my chairs was to be stolen, right, it's just gone. There's nothing to stop them from getting it. There's no way to track it. And so if it's easy to get, that could happen. And literally this did happen. Marcella had part of her wall that was just wall. She had furniture just sitting there. Her great-grandmother's chair was just sitting there. Someone knew that no one was home. They cased the neighborhood very easily. It's a pedestrian area. You can walk around very easily. They looked, there was nothing to encumber them going in, and they just hopped over the wall, grabbed the chair, and hopped back. They didn't try to break into their house. They didn't try to bypass a lock. They didn't try to break into anything, cut into anything, sneak into anything. They didn't have to have equipment, nothing. They were able to hop the wall, which took some effort, but only a little bit of effort, minutes of effort and no tools, grab the chair. And except for the moment that they're hopping the wall with the chair, getting caught with a chair, no one knows whose chair it is. Everyone has chairs. There's no reason you couldn't be walking around with a chair. And it's a petty crime with no violence and just there's very low risk, and they were able to steal a chair. So in that example, people refer here to that as a safety issue. And if someone just stole a chair out of your yard, which is what happened, it was her yard in the United States, people will be like, well, that sucks, right? Like, obviously it's not cool, but we wouldn't consider it breaking and entering. We wouldn't consider it a major violation. We wouldn't call it a safety issue. So it's a very different perspective. So that is worth noting. And that's when I lived in Eastern Europe, it was even more severe that people would consider leaving a wallet in a car and someone finding the car unlocked with the windows down and grabbing it. That's a safety issue to Romanians, because in Romania, they would assume that leaving your wallet in an open car would be safe. Maybe not completely safe, maybe they don't recommend you do it, but they would not expect it to be gone when they came back. But if you go to other places from Romania, they'll be like, oh no, it's not safe. People will take things out of your car if you leave it open. I'm like, if you leave it open? Did you add that part to the end? That's what you consider a risk? Yeah, of course, people are going to take things out of an open car. But in Romania, they generally won't. So their view of safety, their consideration of safety is very different. And I'm sure if you're in a war zone, right, getting bruised or cut or minor injuries is probably not a big thing. They don't say, you won't be safe. Oh, sure, you come back with bruises. That's not going to kill you, right? They're worried about death. In America, we're worried about injury or cuts. Like in Nicaragua, they're worried about theft. And of course, there's also, right, in the United States, if someone steals my camera, for example, my camera is a small portion of a normal American income, but it's an enormous portion of a standard Nicaraguan income. So this particular camera is about $500, right? A normal American salary is going to be several $1,000s per month minimum. So this may be approaching a week's salary, maybe, but that's about it. That's about the maximum it could likely be. But for an average Nicaraguan, this may represent 2 months of income, a nearly insurmountable amount. So little thefts, or what we consider relatively petty thefts, in the United States could easily represent much more of a grand theft kind of thing in Nicaragua, at least in how it interacts with society. So that also makes financial damage transactions in Nicaragua more of a concern. And it is true that someone who puts in months of work and loses that income because they were depending on the camera for work or whatever, that could be a really tragic thing, even though there's no physical harm per se. So in Europe, because they have basically nothing to worry about, it's so incredibly safe, they start to imagine things to worry about. And of course, even animals breaking into your house is a thing. Here in Nicaragua, because we leave our houses open, animals jump in all the time. I have an orange cat who lives in the neighborhood and steals my dog's food every day. A true thief, and he generally gets away with it. Once in a while, he gets trapped and gets petted. We also have food sometimes on the counter that hasn't been cleaned up yet. He'll jump in and take the dishes. He's pretty hilarious and pretty much has the run of the house. So we also have, and this brings us to the windows thing, which I promised we talk about, the bars and the windows. So just like Europe has a completely different relationship with their windows than North America or Nicaragua and much of Latin America. In Europe, it has a tendency to have windows that when you want to open them, open completely, or do that leaning thing, which is really cool. We all wish we had that. Trust me, we're all jealous. But they have really awesome windows that are affordable in Europe and basically unobtainable in the rest of the world, where you have big, solid, strong windows that can either open completely up, and it's like the side of your house is just open, or they can lean out and get a small amount of wind, and the side of the house acts like it's closed, but you're getting wind. This is really fantastic for the way that the weather is in Europe, where you're generally using fresh air or closing the windows to control the heat, and you don't need to worry about air conditioning, or at least historically did not need to, and you're not super concerned with security because it's really safe. Those windows are the envy of the world, and the ability to use those windows on a day-to-day basis is the envy of the world. Europe has a great weather situation, or again, did historically. That has ended, and those windows are fantastic. And then bringing down that barrier on the outside to insulate when it's cold, to keep the sun out completely when it's hot, and to provide that I can just lock up the house and not have to worry about it, sense of peace, is wonderful. A lot of Europeans are quite wealthy, so having mechanisms like that are rather fancy and extensive is not a big expenditure. And when you have that secondary house, it's just a peace of mind you get to have. And like our razor wire, if it's cheap and easy and really does protect against the things you're worried about, why not have some peace of mind for very little money? And it's going to make it easier to sell your house and so forth. It all makes sense. Now, for coming to the United States, they have different needs. They can't do the wide open window thing. They definitely can't do the slant thing because they've got little tiny bugs all over the place. Loads of mosquitoes and gnats and flies and black flies and horseflies and all these different things crawling everywhere. Not everywhere, but the majority of the populated regions of North America are pretty heavy in bugs. The whole world is appalled when they go to that region just how many bugs there are. And Americans have no idea that the whole world has fewer bugs. Like, it's really, really wild. It's one of my favorite things moving away from America that we never talk about. But everywhere I've ever been has so many fewer bugs. It is crazy. Okay, anyway, so that means every American window has a screen on it. They need to keep out the bugs. And this is legit. This isn't some fear reaction. This isn't an emotional reaction. It's completely practical. America and Canada are the land of bugs. They have to keep them out. So windows are based around that. And you do need to open your windows a bit traditionally because people needed a lot of air, but that's starting to go away. A lot of people are just giving up on fresh air, partially because they're afraid to have their windows open. Traditionally, America was very, very safe and people were comfortable with their windows being open, but that is not as much the case today as it used to be. And once in a while, you'll find someone who has wide open windows, but that's pretty rare because just some nasty things that'll come in. There's a lot of bugs in the US that you would be surprised the rest of the world is not familiar with or find so uncommon they don't really think about it. Here in Nicaragua, we have yet a different set of circumstances. We don't have air conditioning like North America, typically. When we do, it tends to be isolated rooms. We don't have the need to shut up the house because not that many people have second houses like in Europe, and we let animals come and go and we keep houses wide open. And when we do have empty houses, we generally have cuidadors with them. So because of that, we don't normally close windows. And this is true in large swaths of the country. Their houses will be wide open from a window perspective 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So here, for example, we have never once closed up our windows except for we close them when they do the fumigation fumigations they hold the fumigation in the house to kill the bugs. But other than that, we leave the windows wide open every single day, all day long, because you can't enter through them. They have bars on them. If we had screens on them, we'd be worried a little bit about leaving our kids or our dogs home alone over long periods of time when we're away. If someone did go over the walls, which do not have a ton of protection, it's just razor wire, people. It's not a big deal. If someone did go over that, they could go right into the house. But instead, we have bars on the windows. This allows both our cat who lives in the house and our not cat who lives outside and takes over our house to come and go as they please. Our dogs, well, my big one could not possibly, the little one could get out if he really needed to. So differences in climate, differences in wildlife and environment, and in cultural factors, such as the desire for privacy versus a desire to be connected to the public outside of your house and traditions in your area, play really large roles as far as how windows and different security measures are designed in different regions. And there's other things as well. And this is something that people really don't think about, but most of Europe has not been colonized. They have not had to face that. The United States was, of course, colonized, but the culture that exists in the United States now is predominantly those of the colonizers. So the concept of life in North America has a tendency to be seen through the view of people who conquered others or who took from others, not those who things were being taken from. Here in Latin America, nearly all of Latin America has a recent history with colonizers, both in being full colonies where they were conquered and actually ruled by other countries, and in many cases quite recently where colonial forces are involved in uprisings, trying to influence and sometimes actually putting troops on the ground. Nicaragua specifically has a really recent history of colonization. Just 46 years ago, it was completely occupied by the U.S. for 70 years. So still over the last 130 years or so, it is predominantly colonial rather than sovereign. Now, it's been sovereign for quite some time, but those traditions that came up during the New Spain era, which is barely over 200 years ago, those traditions that came up under the Mexican era, which only lasted a couple years, but was less than 200 years ago, under the American colonial period in the 1800s, or over the American colonial period in the 1900s, are all very recent, and each one reinforces that you may be in a position of needing to hide within your homes. And so there is a tradition of structures, especially in the colonial cities like Granada, Acatal, Leon. We're designing houses with strong bars. First of all, many of the houses, those bars and those windows predate sovereign Nicaragua. In more recent buildings, which is the majority of the city, obviously not much of it is older than 200 years, but in the last 200 years, it was still reinforced many times to put bars on windows, partially because keeping out the potential of invaders, whether those invaders were current or they knew or know that the risk of invaders is a real thing. Nearly everyone who lives in Nicaragua has a direct memory of a time where there were foreign forces inside the country. And of course, foreign forces entering your home is a lot scarier than a home invader. So for those reasons, people are more likely to have and I'm not saying that people are worried about this today, but even this house that people see quite often, you can see the bars on my windows, I think in the video, this house was built during an occupied era, right? The country was occupied by foreign forces when this house was built, and this is a relatively recent house. Most of the houses you see are this old or older, many about 20, 30 years older than this. That's when a lot of the houses were built, and then it makes sense why they have bars on the window from that reason alone. And of course, if that is that recent and people remember that happening, they do have a certain amount of fear of it happening again. But far more influential is simply that this is a tradition of how to build houses. It's how people think of building houses. And if you have every single house in the neighborhood has bars on the windows and you're the one house that doesn't, you're going to advertise that you're a target for having someone try to get into your house and do things, right? Once everyone else is that much more secure, it's kind of like, imagine if you're in America and you knew that 9 out of 10 houses had a gun and 1 did not, and you knew which one that was simply by looking at the house casually. You don't have to research it. You just walk through a neighborhood and look and say, whoa, they all have gun stickers on the windows and this one doesn't. Well, the idea, the risk that someone has a gun is an incentive not to go into a house. You don't need to know if they have one or not, but if you know for certain that they don't, that makes it a target when others do. If they all don't, it's fine. So by not having bars, you would make yourself a target. So because it is a cultural thing across Latin America historically and remains one, and there are many areas legitimately of Latin America that do need bars on the windows. And there were time periods under the occupation when Nicaragua did. I had to move out back to record because my neighbors started playing music so loudly that I could not record for the last several hours, but I need to get this recorded before we head back to the US. So I'm going to be cut a little bit short on the topic today, but I think I got the point across that there are different ways of approaching security. There are different concepts of what is secure. There's a different feeling as to what we want to protect against, and there's different practicalities in different regions based off of what the potential threats actually are, what is cost effective, what is needed for the climate, and historical cultural differences that cause people to simply see certain things as normal. They would never occur to someone in Latin America not to put bars on the windows. It's just how you do windows. At some point, people forget why they did that. Just like many American homes may never consider having their windows open full time, yet my in-laws are a perfect example. My wife's sister's house never opens up the windows and goes to fresh air. They're either on heat or cooling, and sometimes they just shut it off, but they never have the windows open, yet the windows all have the potential to open. They're just locked closed all the time. So having screens, having the ability to open the windows, just like bars in an area that is safe, they are a vestige. So there's a lot of factors that go into these things, and it's easy to look at any given region from another and feel like it looks insecure because each region, Europe, North America, Latin America, they all do security measures and privacy measures that are different from the other regions. And each one to each other one looks like they're fearful of something that they would never really worry about in the other regions. But the reality is that all of them have the potential to be pretty safe. All of them have regions that are relatively dangerous. All of them want to secure to some degree, and all of them have things that they don't worry about that the other regions tend to, whether rightfully or not. It's not about one region being so much safer than the others. It's that we see them differently. So getting some perspective, because this is so common. There seems to be a playbook that people in North America are constantly saying these exact words. Oh, well, you have this really cheap, simple security measure that does very little to protect you and doesn't lock things down. Therefore, it must be a super scary place. Obviously, that is really disingenuous, the same as it would be really silly if we pointed out that people lock doors in North America. You must be terrified you locked your doors. No, it does not work that way. In all regions, we have more or less the same goals. We want to be able to spend as little money as possible, keep things convenient, and make ourselves feel secure. There's reasons why people go to great lengths, even in the United States, even in super safe neighborhoods, even in places where really you never have to worry about a break-in or anything. People still live in gated communities. People still have security guards. People still have security systems. You have systems like ADT, right? That's not something that we have in Nicaragua. There's no service that I know of. Someone just asked me, and a bunch of people were like, no, there's no service like this in the country. There's nothing like ADT. You can't go out and have this monitored service, but we can very cheaply have security guards. In here, to have something like ADT would be a luxury. Like, how could you spend so much on security? Who could be that worried? But in North America, you'd say, who could afford to have a security guard? That's so expensive. How could you be that worried, right? But we have different economics. We have different things. In North America, very rarely do you have to take continuous deliveries, except for Amazon. Like, it would be super handy to have a security guard just to take your Amazon boxes. Like, come on, you know you want one. It would be great. They're just really expensive. But here we have people coming and going through our gate constantly. It's a major factor. Having a security guard to take our deliveries, which are mostly food, but sometimes other things, and to open the gate and let cars come and go all the time. These are really big deals for us, in addition to, boy, it's nice having someone to watch over our dogs, make sure if our dogs escape, there's someone to chase them. If our kids are here alone, there's an armed guard all the time. Whether it's just an actual security measure or just additional peace of mind, if it's something you can afford and it's easy to do and it creates a job, why not do it? If it's something that has value to you, especially for us where it does so many things. And it's so nice. Once in a while, we'll have something happen, right? Something goes bump in the night. We go running out. Is it a snake? Is it a lizard? We've had our security guard come out and kill poisonous snakes that were in the area before. Would we have been okay without him? Yes, but is it nice having a security guard that takes care of those things? It sure is. Is it nice sleeping at night and hearing something outside and not having to worry if you have to go out and check on it because there's a person verifying that you don't need to do anything? Like, it's not necessarily a security thing. There could be an accident in front of the house. There could be something. If I'm needed, my security guard that I know and trust is going to come wake me up and be like, hey, we need you to go deal with something. It's never happened, but it would if such a thing happened. Knowing that is great. When I lived in the hotel, obviously we had security because it's required to have security if you have a hotel, and sleeping with knowing there's a person awake and that any sound you hear outside is something safe. There's someone watching over you, and anything that's going on is being taken care of. Remember, life here is a lot more vibrant. The chances in, like, the United States, and depending on where you live, it changes a lot. But for the most part, living in the United States, if you hear something at night, it's not going to be something you have to deal with. The U.S. tends to sleep at night. Once you go to bed, the world is over until morning. It's just kind of the way that North America works. But here in Latin America, life is a lot more 24 hours, even if the shopping is not. But the bars and stuff are open till 4. People are still getting home until nearly 5 o'clock in the morning. You see life going on, people heading to work, getting home from work at all hours. And so there's actually a bit more opportunity, at least in the expat world, especially when you're dealing with hotels and restaurants and stuff, that there is activity all throughout the night. Our businesses are still active very late at night, very early in the morning. We're serving the earliest breakfast on the beach. We're one of the last bars to close, certainly not the last, but we're a late bar as well. Our friends are out doing things. There's messages being sent around. We're wondering if people have come or gone. And that's another thing. Like here, a lot of us like to go out. It's nice knowing that there's someone to let you in at all hours of the night. There's always someone to check. Hey, did someone get home at night? Or let us know if someone's not home by a certain time, or please open the doors for them. And I don't have to carry keys. That's actually a really big deal. I don't carry keys. I go out walking a lot. That would actually be not a problem, but it would be inconvenient if I always had to have keys with me or leave them in the car somewhere. Like, I don't want to have to do that stuff. I want to be able to just take my camera and go, maybe have $3-4 in my pocket so I can buy a drink or whatever, like real basic stuff. I don't want to have keys weighing down. I always have the problem that like my shorts don't want to stay on when I'm out hiking or stuff. That's that much harder. I don't want something bumping against. That's how my iPhone got scratched, right? One coin in my pocket got up against the screen and scratched a lens. I don't want to have to do that stuff. And I know that that's kind of whiny, but that's a really nice feature, knowing that no matter where I am, what I'm doing, I can get home 24/7, and I have a security guard who will walk up, identify me, and let me in. I don't have to carry anything to have that security of it being locked behind me and opening when I get there. When I pull up in a car, someone opens the gate for me. I don't have to get out. I don't have to carry those keys. There's a lot of those things. Before we had a security guard, we were really annoyed by the logistics of dealing with all this stuff and people ringing the bell for the house all the time. These sound minor, and they could be, and there's certainly things you can live with, but why, if you're going, we have just all these benefits, but North Americans so often see those benefits as worthless and see the idea of having security, just having a level of peace of mind that we can't have other places. And maybe that's the biggest thing for here in Latin America. We're able to have a level of security that we could never have in North America. When I lived in Carrollton, Texas, which is an incredibly nice, safe place, my wife didn't feel comfortable having the shades drawn. They always had to be down. It always had to be not dark, but it always had to be obscured. She could not handle ever having available windows where someone could see into the house. We almost never could have the windows open for breezes. We had some windows that faced our side yard. Those would be okay. But for the most part, we couldn't have fresh air because it bothered her. She was worried about the safety in the neighborhood. We had situations where the house directly behind us that basically shared a wall. Technically, there was an alley between us. It was a meth lab, and we had a SWAT team go through our yard, and we had to hit the ground and hide on the floor with our children because there was fear of them being shot. No one was actually shot, but loose bullets in a situation where SWAT is going through your yard is scary. There's been times we haven't been able to drive home because of police blocking off our street, and we live in a really safe neighborhood, a really safe street, a really nice area. And these things are still scary. We always had to have completely isolated backyard fences because that privacy is something that you really value, and you worry about neighbors looking in and neighbors calling. And when we lived in New York, in all the places we lived in New York, we had neighbors who would mess with us and cause problems, and homeowners associations that would make it really scary and unpleasant to be home. You always had people watching you, always people kind of threatening you. And just we had this different feeling. And when we go home to Houston, we have these feelings of everyone's fearful, and they don't have the benefits of gated communities. They don't have the benefits of security guards. They don't have the benefits of bars on the windows because those things would be looked down upon or be outrageously expensive. So they're not really available. So we live with this feeling of fear from being there. And because we live in Latin America, we can very easily afford a house with bars, with outside walls, with simple security measures. And we're able to live with our doors wide open, our windows wide open. Not only do I get fresh light, the bright light from outside, but I have fresh air from outside all the time. Things that we couldn't do in Texas because the family didn't feel safe doing that. And here, they're completely safe doing that. So yes, we're able to have more security measures that make that feel that way for them, but mostly that's because they're carrying those fears on from the United States, not things that have developed here. And so that's a different perspective to put on it. When we go back, we have to live a different life. We have to live a more watch what you say, a more don't get close to the windows, a more you can't leave anything unlocked life. Whereas here, we're able to leave the doors unlocked, the windows wide open, whether it's during the day, whether it's at night, whether it's fresh air, everything. It's a totally different experience. And to me, right, it is so shocking that coming from North America, people would look at just how much more relaxed, just how much safer, just how much more we can enjoy. I'm outside right now, my doors are wide open, I can wander around the yards. I'm able to do that because I'm in a safer place. That they see that incredible level of safety, that level of luxury, that comfort, as somehow being scary. There's so much fear coming from North America that everything looks scary, and that's a real thing. That is, the world looks at America and Canada to some degree, is that the core cultural element of the region is fear. Everyone's scared. They're scared of the government. They're scared of big business. They're scared of their neighbors. They're scared of the future. They're scared of monetary collapse. They're scared often in both directions, right? They're scared of things happening. Everyone's afraid that inflation is going to make the dollar go bad, but they're afraid of deflation. They're afraid of everything, right? And it's an amazing cultural thing. And moving to most parts of the world, people have things to be scared of, but for the most part, people don't feel scared most of the day. That's not like how people feel. But when you go to America, it's not a specific thing. It's this general underlying fear is a main element of the culture. And it comes out in the way that people live, and it comes out in the way that people perceive the rest of the world. Common things in the rest of the world, they assume that fear must be what's driving all the decisions. And they're just not really prepared for other factors to be important. So I think that really kind of wraps up. It's an extreme difference, and I recommend that people spend some time and explore the world and come to realize, whether it's Nicaragua or go to Spain or go to Romania, go to Greece, go to some of these incredibly safe places that may sound scary to you. Kosovo, great example where it's incredibly safe, but people assume it must not be. Go check it out. Learn what safe living feels like, and it will open your eyes as to the behaviors and the responses that a fear-based culture will create. And it's unfortunate because I grew up in America and we still feel these fears. These fears come with us. And when we go back, we're reminded of how rough it is. And we feel badly for everyone who lives there because it's everything, right? It's the way that the media presents the news. It's the way that the government tries to manipulate people. They use fear as the standard tool. It's the go-to mechanism to try to drive desired change or desired behavior. And it's effective over time. It becomes a part of everything that we do. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Alan Miller. And as always, you can join the community, share on social media, tell someone about the show, and I will see all of you tomorrow.